I'll pass these out in a minute. I want to say a word of thanks again for Dr. Siao coming and teaching us. I am so sorry I was not here last week, and I look forward to watching that. This is the third of 5 weeks on the second part of Job, and it has been rich what I have seen so far, and am grateful very much for your scholarship and your friendship over the years. So I'll go ahead and just hold up a hand if you don't have one of these handouts, and I'll get you one, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Indiana Griffiths. So today we are on the third poetic movement of the first speech. The first divine speech, as I suggested the first week, comprises of 3 movements: the first on cosmology, second mineralogy, and the third on zoology. You may notice the chapter divisions are not quite the same. As I would argue, chapter and verse divisions were added only late. Originally, the Bible had no verse or chapter divisions. Then they added verse divisions, and then later on added chapter divisions, because it's kind of hard to refer to text. Each time you refer to a text. I'm on. Okay. Yeah. All right. So every time they want to refer to a text, that passage that says blah 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 blah. And it's hard to do concordance that way. So they produce chapter and verse divisions, but those are the opinions of the people who prepared the chapter and verse divisions. So these 3 movements correspond to the first movement is really about creation of the cosmos. The second is about sustenance, provision of water, sustain the cosmos. And the third, wonders creatures in life. So first, I want to introduce the motif called the Lord of Animals motif, or the Mistress of Animals. This is a motif we find in iconography, starting about 5000 in Sumer, ancient Sumer, about 5000 BCE. Then it spread from there eastward to India, the Indus Valley, to Harappa, and westward to the Aegean, north Anatolia, and south to Egypt. Widespread from 5000 BCE to about 200 of the Common Era. A very common motif. So you typically see this, usually animals, at first just animals, and later on animals with a humanoid figure at the center, often holding on to animals with both hands. So you find this very common, and the point of this is control of chaos. The humanoid figure represents God, and by extension, the king. So the earliest in Sumer is something like this. About 3300, you see this serpentine, these are called siopads, serpent and lion or leopard, long necks, and intertwined. So it started in Sumer about 3300. And then in Egypt, we find the same image. On the right side, you see the 2 siopads, and there are ropes holding on to the necks of these animals. So the point here is control. This is a political propaganda. So the king of southern Egypt now controls the north, and now chaos is controlled. Okay? So this original use of the motif, extremely common in iconography throughout the region. So it's about cosmology and politics. Remember the first week we talked about Gudea, the most famous builder of ancient times. His building project was a temple. The temple represents the universe. Okay. The temple, when completed, it was completed with timber brought from the Syrian mountains. So traditionally, all over the region, they regarded the mountains of Syria as the place where the gods had original dwelling, at the source of the Tigris and Euphrates. Okay. Euphrates, and so they will bring the mountain to the people. So they brought timber from the mountains for the temple in Sumer, and this is said to be for wonder, so that you look at temple and wonder, how is it that God could dwell here? The Sumerians were plain dwellers, right? So in the ideology of folks in the world, gods dwell in the mountains, or Sumer is flat. So they built their own mountains, you see, the ziggurat, right? The step temple. You can go up the ziggurat and encounter God. So when the temple was completed, they decorated it with animals. The animals represent the life of the entire cosmos. The temple represents the cosmos. So starting the second millennium, the Assyrians first, and then later on the Egyptians began building zoos and botanical parks. See, so they will bring in plants from all over, especially from the Syrian mountains, and exotic creatures from the far edges of the world. See, and this represents the cosmos, which the king controlled. See, so the first botanical gardens and zoological parks were set up for propagandistic reasons. See, and the kings explicitly say, this is for wonder at the power of God and God's representative on earth, namely the king. Okay? So this is the background. And so you often have wondrous creatures in architecture, on city gates and outer walls of cities and temples. You have animals. On the far right side, you see the famous Ishtar Gate. Famous Ishtar Gate with all these animals. These are exotic creatures in the far edges of the cosmos. In the center, you see three examples. This is from a site in northern Syria called Tel Halaf. All these animals represent the wondrous creatures of the cosmos, which the king controlled. On the left side is a temple called Ain Dara, a really remarkable temple. It's got all these animals on four sides. These animals correspond to the animals that Ezekiel saw in his vision. Okay, so you get an idea of the ideology. So we saw in the first week that the first movement was very well structured because the point of the speech was about design. And so the entire speech was well designed. Last week we saw it was not as well designed, at least the design was not obvious because the subject matter was phenomena, right? And so you do not get a good structure. Now you return to structure. So we have 7 stanzas. 7 stanzas. 7 is the number of perfection in ancient Israel. So each stanza comprises of one animal or one type of animal: lions, wild goats, wild donkey, wild ass, wild ox, ostrich, horse, and raptors. First, lions. Lions are the quintessential predator seen as endangering human beings and livestock. So you see on the left side a Phoenician ivory of a lion biting a slave. And talk about curly hair, Egyptian slave, a African slave. On the right side, you see lion attacking livestock. These are extremely common images you find throughout the ancient Near East. The lion is a metaphor for the threat of the powerful and the wicked. Lion symbolize injustice. The lions are always on the prowl, so the wicked are always on the prowl for prey. On the left side, you see an image of a master of lion, a master of animals motif. We get the master holding on to 2 lions on each hand, and then the right side is another image from the Ishtar Gate. Kings are depicted throughout the ancient Near East as uniquely capable of suppressing the predatory powers of lions, suppressing chaos. And so the Assyrians had staged lion hunts. And this image here is a famous lion hunt by the Assyrian king Ashurnasirpal. You can tell it's staged because the lion is in a cage. You see that? So they bring the lion in a cage and then release the lion so that the king can shoot at the lion and say, see what power I have over chaos. See? So you see the lion is being released from the cage, and on this side you see the king fighting the lion, supposedly. See? So lion hunts will symbolize the king's power over nature, power over chaos, right? Chaos has to be suppressed, and who else better do it than the king, representing God. And so kings are seen as earthly reflection, the image of God. Okay. They are the ones able to tame the powers of chaos. And so you see on this side here, lion is so docile, see, because the king has done a good job in taming them, right? And then on this other side, from the famous palace of Sargon, you see the king holding on to a little lion on his arm as if it were just a pet. See? So these are all propagandistic. So our text says, do you, God is speaking to Job, do you hunt prey for the lion and satisfy the appetite of young lions? When they crouch in the lairs, lurk in a covert for an ambush. On the right side, you see an image of a hippopotamus tooth on which is carved image of a lion in a covert. Okay. God who provides its game for the evening, when its cubs cry to God, wander about without food. Lion metaphor is very common in Job. Job refers to his angry protests. So you have Job patient for all of 2 chapters. Okay. By the 3rd chapter, Job is furious. He yells at God, he protests against creation, and he calls his protest my roars. Like he's angry as a lion. To this, Eliphaz, his friend, in the next speech responds, such roars are dangerous. See, and predators who roar like this will be defanged. See? So God is going to defang you, and your brood will starve to death. He threatens Job. But Job doesn't back off. So he complains later that God hunts him like a lion. Okay. God, like a lion hunting him, and God has ferociously ripped him apart as if he were prey. Now here, in our passage, contrary to expectation, this speech does not dissociate God from the lion. Instead, it acknowledges that God is one who hunts for the lion. That is, God hunts on behalf of the lion, as if it were a parent lion hunting for its young, a male lion hunting for its young. But contrary to Job's charge, that God does not, Job throughout complains, that God does not hear when he cries, or when the miserable are dying, are crying to God, God doesn't seem to care. Now the poet argues that God does respond when lion cubs cry of hunger. So this is not a God totally against the wild, but a God among the wild. We'll talk later on about what this means for our theology. So God as a parent lion. This passage offers no assuring image of God as one who keeps chaos in check. The commentators always say that the point of the passage is about God keeping chaos in check. But the passage offers no such comfort of God offering keeping chaos in check, even as evil persists and the literal and metaphorical lions still prey. The wicked still attack the vulnerable. The fearsome lion here is a visible reminder of the awesome power and majesty of God, who cannot be tamed for the sake of human comfort. But the poet challenges the adequacy of human understanding of the wild as other. Humans, like Job and his friends, perceive lions only as a maleficent predator to be violently suppressed, as indeed justice requires. But the poet of Job presents an entirely different view of the lion. The lion here is a father lion who feeds his needy cubs. Human moral categories of right and wrong, just and unjust, are inadequate for characterizing wild animals. And certainly, they are insufficient for imagining God. We'll come back to this point later on. Then the next animal are wild goats or ibexes. Okay. The Hebrew term refers to a particular kind of wild mountain goats, ibexes, that were ubiquitous in Western Asia and Egypt. The variety known in Israel, in Palestine, is called the Nubian ibex. The habitat is in the steep mountains. They're extremely secretive through the reproductive process. In fact, it's only in recent years, only in the 20th century, after 30 years of study, were they able to document the reproductive process of these animals. In Israel, it took a team 30 years to study the biology of these animals, because they were so secretive. They are typically in the high crevices, in the steep mountains, high crevices, inaccessible places, see, away from the predators. So what's interesting is that the lion and the ibex are often paired, as you see in these seals. You see here, typically you have, oops. Yeah, it's, so sensitive. You see the lion stalking the ibex, right? See, so the ibex, the lion is quintessential predator. The ibex is the quintessential prey. Okay, so they are paired in iconography. Ibexes are found in iconography of Israel. On the left side, you see a cult stand from the 10th century in northern Israel. It's four-tiered, at the top of which is a horse. The second tier, you have ibexes, two ibexes flanking a tree. Okay, and then at the bottom, you see the master of lion, a master of animals motif, with the master controlling the lions. On the right side, you see a painting from a pottery in southern Sinai, with a tree, so-called tree of life, flanked by two ibexes, and at the bottom of which you see a lion. So these are quite common, right? Here we see the passage says wild goats. The point here is the mystery of the wild goats' reproductive process. Do you know the birthing time of wild goats, of the cracks? Do you watch the carving of the hinds? And as I argued, literally, humans cannot watch it. And for humans, it's important to watch animals giving birth because that's part of what you domesticate animals. You have to understand how they behave. But ibexes, humans cannot observe, right? Do you count the months that they fulfill? Do you know the time of their birthing? See, all these are mysteries of human beings, right? It's not all about you. You do not know such things, right? They crouch, deliver their young, send forth their offspring. Their kids become strong, going up in the wild, leave and do not return. Ibexes are very common in iconography. In Israel, we find all kinds of images as we find in these seals. So you see, notice that all these seals have the ibex with a suckling young, right? With a kid, okay, with a kid. And so this scholars have called this the tree of life. They think the ibex represents fertility, and the tree is a tree of life. So in every case, all these seals, you find a tree, either a tree, a stylized tree, or a representation of a tree, a sprig. Okay, but I don't think that is about fertility. I'll talk about this. We find also images like this. See ibexes flanking a tree, and most commonly, you see on the right side, you see ibexes flanking a tree on a mountain. On a mountain. Okay, this is important because this is the motif of a cosmic tree. So the motif of ibex and trees is attested throughout Western Asia, beginning about 4000 BCE, even before the invention of writing. There are some hundreds of examples found in Israel. Okay. There are, let's see, I think there's something like 1,200 examples of these images found in ancient Israel. So the iconography from Sumer suggests that ibexes are associated with the cosmic tree, often put on top of a mountain, so that the mountain is like that, then you tree on top of it, so that all of it together is a vertical axis of the entire cosmos. So the tree represents the cosmos. So the cosmic tree became a symbol of kingship because the king is seen as the one who gives life to all. This metaphor of kingship appears in several passages in the Bible, most often as metaphors for hubris. Okay, the tree grows tall, becomes too arrogant, and so forth. We get an example of this in a dream of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, and he says, upon my bed, this is what I saw. There was a tree at the center of the earth. Notice again, the center of the universe, and its height was great. The tree grew great and strong. Its top reached to the heaven, which in Sumerian is the name of a temple, and it was visible to the ends of the whole world. Its foliage was beautiful, its fruit abundant, and provided food for all. So you have this tree, and then animals take shelter under the tree, birds down on branches. So this tree sustains life in the whole cosmos, and this is a very common symbol of kingship. We'll come back to that point again. The third animal is called a wild ass, the onager. The variety we have here is a Syrian wild ass. I found only one image. Very hard to find images of this because they were extinct very, very early. By the 18th century, it was extinct. Okay, so the wild ass goes free. Yeah, let me go ahead and describe. So they've always tried to domesticate the wild ass, but they failed. Okay, there's one image in Egyptian iconography of a ass that was just beaten. You can see the backside is just red with whips, and still the animal would not bend. Okay. So this creature actually was never domesticated. Okay. So at the bottom, you see some donkeys that are domesticated. Okay, this is from about 3300 BCE. So scholars have thought that this proof that a wild ass was domesticated. In fact, they never were. Now we have archaeological evidence, zoo archaeological evidence, from the bones of wild asses, we know they were never domesticated. Never. Okay. So this here is a symbol of freedom. So the variety known is the Syrian wild ass, right? Typically, they emphasize in the literature throughout Western Asia, in the Bible and in Akkadian literature, emphasize the wildness. They live in the steppes. All this literature reflect the perspective of urbanites, right? First, in the ancient Near East, the city was a symbol of order. Outside the city was chaos. And where the animals, where the wild ass dwelt, that was chaos. Okay. So for urbanites, non-predatorial animals, especially large ones, the primary issue is whether or not they can be domesticated. But this animal was never domesticated. The habitat of the wild ass is said to be a godforsaken place. It's an accursed place that's fit only for the banished from society. When you want somebody to starve to death, you send them to the steppes. Right? Political prisoners were sent to the steppes to die. So that was a place devoid of divine presence. But notice this passage. Who has let the wild ass go free? Who has untied the bonds of the wild donkey? The terms here used for goat set free and untie are terms used for the liberation of the slaves in Exodus. So these terms used for the Exodus are applied now to the wild ass. To whom I've given the steppe as his home, the salt land as his domicile. This is especially important because this pair of terms found as a pair only in reference to the divine presence. It's used of a temple and a tabernacle, always. Okay. But here it's used of the home and domicile of the wild ass, right? Who was kind of ridiculed by the urbanites. Okay. It laughs at the commotion of the city. It doesn't want to be in the city. It laughs at commotion in the city. The shouts of the driver, it does not heed. You see, the city is a place of oppression, right? It explores the mountains for its pasturage, searching for any greenery. So the term for oppressor, for driver, is the term for oppressor in Egypt. See, so urbanites are the ones who are oppressed, whereas these animals are free. And the terms for explore and search, these are terms used of initial exploration of the promised land. See? So the wild ass here is exalted as a specimen of freedom, of divine freedom, and their habitat is where the gods may be found. Then the next animal is called a wild ox. Again, apart from a lion, probably the most common animal in the Lord of Animals motif, as you see in this image here. Lord animal in the middle with two wild oxen on each side. So the wild ox is probably the aurochs, okay? The aurochs, which became extinct about 1500. Okay? So it rivals the lion as the most dangerous animal, okay? Especially, so it became a common epithet for kings and gods. It's famous for its powerful horns, and it's a symbol of virility and power. So wild ass and wild oxen, the wild ass corresponds to the domesticated ass, pack and draft animal, serve human interests in the city. The wild ox corresponds to the ox that the farmers used to serve human interests in the countryside. But unlike the wild ass, which was never domesticated, the wild ox was domesticated by about 1500 BCE, which is why you find a different tone regarding the wild ox. See, in the wild, this description of the wild ass is very realistic, except they are free. Here, would the wild ox be willing to serve you or lodge at your stall? Would you tie the wild ox in a furrow? So the wild ox is supposed to be wild and virile, and yet somehow they are domesticated. To domesticate wild oxen, they had to castrate them. See, right? So after they castrated the oxen, they became tame. See? And here now, would the wild ox be willing to serve you? Right? And the term "willing" there is consent to serve you, as NIV has it. Would it agree to serve you? The Jewish translation have it. Would it desire to serve you? See? Or lodge at your stall. So unlike other animals, aurochs, when they were tamed, were kept in, they were not kept in stalls. You could not keep them in a stall, so they had to put them in paddocks, right? You had to put a fenced, broadly fenced area. And you cannot control the wild ox in a furrow, tell you where to go. So the control animals with a string at the back, and they will tug at the string, and the animal will follow. You cannot do that with the wild ox, see? Right? So here it's ridiculous. You think you have such ability to domesticate animals, see? You cannot control the wild ox. And the reason they turned to ridicule is because they did, in fact, domesticate the wild ox. Then we get the ostrich. The ostrich is delightful, the text says, if its pinion is graceful and burgeoning. This refers to the so-called ostrich dance. And here we have an ivory of an ostrich vainly stretching out its wings, showing off. And there's a word play in the Hebrew, but its wings is actually attenuated. So even though it spread out its wings, looks like it's going to fly, it's beautiful, in fact, it cannot fly, right? And so here we have an ostrich fan holder on the right side, an ostrich fan holder owned by Tutankhamun. Okay, so this fan holder, and on the fan holder, all these feathers, ostrich plumes. Ostrich plumes were famous for their beauty all over the ancient Near East, right? And so here we have Tutankhamun on an ostrich hunt. And notice his chariot horses have ostrich plumes on its heads. And then notice he's already attacking the ostrich here the ostrich over here. Right? So ostrich wings are famous. The ostrich are famous for its beautiful appearance when the wings are stretched. And yet, despite this beauty, it leaves its eggs on the ground. It warms them on dirt. It forgets that a foot may crush them. A wild animal may trample them. It treats its young harshly as not belonging to them. So this all belongs to a tradition in the ancient world. The ostrich were poor parents. They didn't care about the young. And the reason is because ostriches hatch eggs and they were nested communally. So they hatch eggs like this, you see. And then any one parent could take care of these eggs, and the rest would leave, right? And because the eggs were they can only cover about 30 eggs at one time, so they will abandon the other eggs to the side. And so it's not uncommon to find sites like this here on, so sensitive, this thing. Okay, so you'll find ostrich eggs shattered, you see. And so the ostrich got a reputation of being poor parents. Okay? They don't really care about the young. And besides, when you look at ostrich chicks, they look scrawny. They must not have been taken care of by the parents, right? And God has made it oblivious to wisdom. It has not allotted, God has not allotted the ostrich any understanding. So in the classical world too, they thought ostrich was stupid, right? And the classical writers said the ostrich was stupid because they think that when they stick their head on the ground, then they are not vulnerable to attacks. That's how stupid they are. But of course, biologists tell us today that's not the case, right? The ostrich does not actually stick their head on the ground, just looks that way. But in the ancient world, they thought ostrich was stupid. So ostrich would swallow magnets, they would swallow a horseshoe and nails. So ostriches were stupid because God made them that way. So whether or not that was the case is beside the point, because that's their reputation. And yet, the ostrich is also dangerous. When it rears up, it can be extremely dangerous. Has anyone ever seen ostriches before? You go to the Middle East, ostriches are extremely dangerous because they're very, very fast, right? And if it rears up, you cannot escape. Okay, and so you have these scenes of ostriches on the left side. You see a seal where an ostrich is fighting back against a hunter. On the right side, it's even more poignant. You see the ostrich moving away from the hunter. Its head reaches the heavens, right? And the horse is just a little tiny half the size of ostrich. Okay? But here we get the ostrich as defiant. It laughs at its horse and rider. Ostriches are very fast. They can, up to 45 miles per hour. Horses go only up to 40. Okay. So then the next passage is the horse. This seems out of place because of all the animals. This is the only one that is not wild. And so commentators think that it really should not be here. The reason it's here is because the preceding passage ended with horse and rider. And so the description of a horse in verses 21 and 25 is of a military horse, clearly, probably a horse of a war chariot. The details in this passage give the impression of a raging battle, and yet the description of the horse seems hyperbolic. It charges into battle, which horses never do. Horses can be trained not to run away, but it doesn't delight in battles. So what we have, in fact, in this passage is not the description of a war horse, not even a highly trained war horse. It is a passage that reads like an ode, extolling a warrior's uncanny martial instincts and prowess. I'm not going to go into detail, but the language used here is typically used of the manifestation of storm deities. So what we have here is not an ordinary horse. It's not a horse tamed to serve human interests, but a sublime warrior horse, okay, a veritable warrior god. This strange warrior horse is probably the most dangerous of all the creatures, for it embodies and holds in check latent powers that may suddenly be unleashed like a violent storm against adversaries the text does not name. So horses are really important because of all the images. No other image is more well documented in Israel than the horse. There are over 800 horse figurines, some fragmentary, over 800 in Judah alone. Most of them concentrated in Jerusalem. If you count other horse figurines from ancient Israel, other periods, there are over 3,000 of them. Okay, no other animal is so well documented iconography as a horse. The military character of these horses seems plain. Okay, and many of them have riders. Some of them have no riders, probably assuming an invisible rider. So scholars debate their function and significance. Some scholars take the rider to represent a divine warrior. And that's my view as well. I think it represents a god invisibly enthroned, invisibly riding the chariot horse. Okay. Either the God of Israel, or some other storm deity, or a member of celestial hosts, and others think that it's a toy, or I don't think it's a toy. There are now 3,000 of them. It's not a toy. Why would you have 800 in Jerusalem as a toy? I think it's a silly argument. I think it most likely represents divine presence, God as warrior. Finally, the last creature are raptors. The first word for raptor is a word used for a variety of eagle called the long-legged, not eagle, long-legged buzzard. Okay, an example of which is here in the image. It's so-called in parallelism, it's called a vulture. This word for vulture traditionally has been translated as eagle. Okay. In most passages in the Old Testament, where we have eagle, in fact, the term is not eagle, but a vulture. One reason I think this is because eagles do not eat carrion. Eagles do not eat carrion, but vultures do. What we have, typing is terrible. What we have here is what is called a leopard-faced vulture. Okay. You see on the right side, a leopard-faced vulture is particularly refers to a species known in Israel as Torgos trochiliotus navigatus from the Negev region. This is a variety of vulture known to have thrived in southern Levant and Arabia. It builds its nest on protected ledges and crevices of cliffs as high as 1,400 feet above sea level. What? Oh.
Sorry, y'all.
So these vultures have such keen eyesight that from a mile away they can spot a hare and zoom down incredible speed, okay, to pick on the prey. And the chicks are said to devour blood. And one reason why I think it's this particular variety is because you can see the blood on the eagles, which you cannot see in regular eagles, but you see them on vultures like this because the neck is naked, it's without feathers. So I think it's this particular variety of vulture. So vultures are symbols of divine maternal care. It's often used of God caring for people as if God were a mother. Okay, symbol of maternal care, Exodus 19, Deuteronomy 32, Ezekiel. God is represented as a vulture, even though that vulture is an unclean bird. God is represented as a vulture, showing maternal care. The Egyptian hieroglyph of the leopard vulture, you see on the right side, is also the term for mother. That sign, that hieroglyph there, you see, is mut, and then you see the little bread, that means mother. So the vulture is a symbol of motherhood. In Israel, so in Egypt, they're typically shown with outstretched wings, signifying protection. Right? In Israel, these wings are iconic symbol of God's protection and shelter. We find often in the Psalms, under your wings, right? We're under God's wings. That's the image of the vulture. Okay. It's also a symbol of renewal of life. This comes from the molting of the feathers, right? So molting of feathers, then the new feathers are produced. That represents renewal of life, renewal of hope. And so you see here an image in Egypt. Typically, the vulture spreads out its wings. See? That's a symbol of protection. A very common symbol. It's also a symbol for justice. Okay? It's a symbol for the goddess Ma'at, truth, order, and justice, all of which are relevant to this divine speech. So we find all these animals, there are a number of pairings. Okay? First, we find the last two animals, right, the horse and vulture, are very commonly paired in iconography. As you see in this example on the left side, from the temple of Tel Halaf in Syria, the vulture and the war chariot, right? And then on the right side, you see again the vulture. It's like, okay, I'm afraid to touch it. Okay, the vulture and again the war chariot. Very common on seals. You often just find the vulture and the watcher. You find a natural pair. So looking back now, we have a number of pairs. The lion and ibex, both are metaphors deployed in political propaganda. The king, lion, the king as a lord of animals. Right? The ibex, the king as a cosmic tree. These wild animals do not depend on humans for sustenance. The lion provides for its young. In fact, God provides for the lion on the lion's behalf. And wild animals in this speech need no human protection, need no human ruler, as a veritable cosmic tree, providing sustenance for them, providing them with home, shelter, or nourishment. All these animals have their own natural homes. Wild goats procreate and reach maturation without human intervention, without human oversight, care, or protection. All of which implied by the Hebrew verb watch, to watch, which also means to keep, to preserve, to protect. Human beings do not protect or preserve these animals. The verb refers to the care of domestic animals, preservation of life, and frequently used of divine care. God is one who watches over us, the watcher of Israel. The next pair, the wild ox and the wild ass, this correspond to domestic ass and oxen. The ass serves human interests in the city. The ox serves human interests in the countryside. These images subvert the Lord of Animals trope in propaganda. The king as divine image with dominion over all creatures. So originally, the idea of the king as the image of God meant that they have control over all creatures. We find this trope democratized in the Bible. So in the Bible, the human being is the one who represents divine presence, as in Genesis 1, the creation story, right? The old idea that image of God means we have mind or will and so forth, that's not quite what the text says. The word for image means a statue. So a statue is a representation of presence. So when a king has conquered a city, the king will leave the statue in the city as a reminder that the king is present, even though the king is gone. So in the temple, there's a statue of God, which means God is there, even though God is not physically there. So the statue is the image of God. So the king is the image of God. In the Bible, the king, the human being is the image of God. So human being reflects God's presence, and so they have dominion over all creatures. In that sense, this is democratization of the political concept. In Psalm 8, we have this psalmist who wonders. The psalmist is baffled, amazed that God can make human beings only a little bit less than angels, and we control all of the cosmos. So this is a very common metaphor in the Bible. Unfortunately, this democratization also democratized the abuse of power over animals, right? So human beings are supposed to have control over animals. That is, we represent God. And if our theology is right, represent God means we represent God as a benign presence over the cosmos, not as an abusive presence. But this can be abused, and it was abused in ancient times. And so this passage in Job, is corrective to the abuse. It makes the point it's not all about human beings. You are not all that exalted. So we have 7 stanzas. The first 4 go together, and the next 3. So the odd one out is the ostrich, the odd creature at the center of the 7. The discourse does not idealize wild animals, because juxtaposed with the exemplary wild ass and the wild ox is the ostrich. It's a creature that seems vain. It struts around, dancing with its wings stretched out, and it seems callous in parenting. Ostrich is reputed to lack wisdom, though God insists that it is so by divine will. God made the ostrich not wise, implying thereby that this creature, for all its fault, is under divine care. The ostrich is not an unsavory creature. Most commentators argue that the ostrich here represents evil or chaos. I do not believe that. There's a mistranslation, I think. Okay? The ostrich is not an unsavory creature of chaos any more than human beings who are similarly vain, poor parents, reckless, or unwise. Okay. The description makes us wonder and awe. It's inspired, no doubt, by the appearance of the ostrich. It's idiosyncratic. Ostrich looks like a bird, but it doesn't fly. Right? It's got hoofs. It looks like mammals. It's got idiosyncrasies. It's got capacity to inflict harm on its attackers, even though it's one of the most hunted creatures in the region. odd creature is, after all, an embodiment of contradiction. It's a bird but cannot fly, but runs like a camel. In fact, the Latin term for it is ostrich camel. It runs like a camel. It seems ugly, it seems goofy, it seems stupid, right? But it can also be beautiful. The concluding couplet of this stanza, verse 18, encapsulates the ambiguity of the ostrich. It's belligerent, yet admirable. It stands up to the horse and the hunter. The odd creature, this odd creature though, seems curiously reminiscent of Job. Like the ostrich, Job is an embodiment of contradiction. In his case, exemplary piety and also unmitigated rebelliousness. His detractors accuse him of being self-absorbed and lacking wisdom. They warn that his ill-considered roar may bring destruction to himself and his children. Job's a bad parent because he's not pious enough. Bildad's rumination concerning the death of Job's children may be heard as an innuendo that their death was on account of his carelessness. Whether or not these charges are fair is beside the point, for such was Job's reputation, like the ostrich. Above all, Job is defiant, like the ostrich. Yet the text says nothing about the subjugation of the ostrich. So the point here is that God is not going to subjugate Job simply because Job is defiant. The framing of the stanza is important. So the first stanza ends with the provision of prey to lion cubs. The last stanza ends with vulture chicks devouring carrion. So you get a nice framing there of parental image. The lion is not just a predator, but also a parent. The vulture is not just a scavenger, but also a parent. Terrifying predators and detestable scavengers alike belong to the biodiversity of creation. God, as a lion parent, inspires awe and terror, so that even the cubs following him, human beings, do so with trembling. The vulture as a metaphor for divine parenthood is awe-inspiring, yet also comforting. Between these wild parents, the lion and the vulture and their broods, are other parents and their young. The wild goat as a parent seems cautious to a fault. The ostrich is reckless and foolish. Still, each species survive. While vultures associate with death, they are also metaphor for renewal of life. So what do we do with this theologically? The message of Job is not, the message to Job is not that he has no control over chaos. Almost all commentaries argue that the point of passage is that Job has no control over chaos. He never claimed that. Right? He never claimed that. So the passage is not that Job has no control over chaos. Job never doubted that. What the poet offers here is a deconstruction of Job's dualistic moral categories. What the passage does is broaden his horizon so that he might view the outward margins of existence with empathy. The lion we look at with terror is a parent. The vulture we look at with disgust is a parent. The passage calls for a radical reimagination of the Imago Dei, of what it means to be in the image of God. The Imago Dei that finds fulfillment not in human-centeredness, but in a creation theology that's inclusive of all creatures. We are to consider the issue raised in the central stanzas, namely the human-centered conceit of the image of God in light of the outer stanza. So we consider not the center, human-centeredness, but consider them at the outer edges, the outer images. Humanity in the image of God is not God in the image of humanity. We often mistaken that. We think God is like us. We are like God because so God is like us. The creatures of the wild, insofar as they evoke metaphors of God elsewhere in the Bible, reflect in some way the nature of God beyond the dichotomous moral categories of right and wrong, just and unjust, good and evil. God is above such categories, and we can see them even in wild animals. If we can see a lion and not see only in one way or other, how much less, that tells us something about God as other. God is simply, but terrifyingly other. God acts in ways contrary to what we might find, what we might expect of the Lord of Animals motif. This is a God who let creatures be. Given the framing of the discourse, we may understand the animals in between the first and the last stanzas to also reflect divine nature. The creatures in this speech inhabit spaces, mountains, the steppes, and so forth, that are considered uninhabitable and chaotic. And yet, these are the very sites of freedom, which are the loci of divine presence, as the case of the wild as suggests. These animals exist in a world where evil persists, where life is precarious, and cruelty and violence and injustice abound. And yet, unbeknownst to humanity, God watches over the vulnerable, provides for the needy, and sets the oppressed free. Human beings try like mad to domesticate the wild ass, but the wild ass is one who's been set free by God, text claims. Some creatures in this series model resilience and dignity and courage. I think the wild ass does that. Others are vain and reckless, foolish and belligerent, like the ostrich that is so much like us. Some creatures, no match for their human subjugators, nonetheless refuse to be servile. Other creatures that stand up to violent aggressors, as the ostrich does. This is an unsettling world where one finds home and domicile, even in desolate realms that seem God-forsaken. There can be refuge and comfort from unexpected sources. Indeed, as the poet says of the vulture at the end of the movement, with not a little irony, I think, wherever the slain are, there he is. The specter of death looms over all of us. A postscript that is both sad and hopeful. Most of the creatures in this passage are now extinct, despite its theoethical warnings. The aurochs became extinct in the Levant by about 500 BCE. Lions have not been found in the region since the 13th century. The Syrian wild ass was last seen in 1927. The last ostrich of the region was spotted in 1928. The wild mountain goat, the ibex, has been officially listed as an endangered species, with fewer than 2,500 mature animals remaining for fast dwindling population. But the last creature, a sign of hope. The leopard-faced vulture, known in Israel as Torgos draculotus navigensis, was regarded as extinct. But in March of 2011, it was spotted twice, with a wingspan of 10 feet. It's a sign of hope, and we have a picture of it to prove it. That's the leopard-faced vulture, now found in Israel, the only one that's been found, and found twice. Despite all that we've done to destroy the world, there's nevertheless a sign of hope in the vulture of all things. Okay, so this is a passage that's really difficult. I think that this passage is probably the most difficult in the book of Job, which is a very difficult book. Book of Job is said to be the most difficult book in the Bible. This is the most difficult passage, and there's one verse where every single word is disputed. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Notice that none of the animals is tame. Right? So the point of this is supposed to talk about the world. And yet, what the poet highlights is not the tame animals. The poet highlights the weird and the wild. See, those on the outer edges, reminding us that the world is not about us. See, when we suffer, we think the whole world is about us. When the first thing Job does is, because he suffers, he calls for the whole creation to become undone. Let darkness take over. Let chaos reign. Why? Because I suffer. And because I suffer, creation has no meaning. Creation has no meaning. Because I suffer, God does not exist. And I point, yes, God does exist. It's not about you. We are not the center of the world, contrary to what most of the Bible says. We are not the only people that matter. See, and so the creatures described, none of it is tame, and they're all sublime and wild and weird. Remind to us, see, that God is not to be tamed. So it's a really difficult passage because of philology. Many words are just not found elsewhere. They're not found elsewhere. Well, they're not found elsewhere in Hebrew, so you need Akkadian, Egyptian, Arabic, and so forth. And also the zoological aspects. I had to learn all kinds of stuff in zoology, learn about ibexes and their reproductive process, learn about different varieties of eagles and vultures, and so forth. So it's a difficult passage, but I also found it to be terribly exciting because so many images, most well documented in terms of images, thousands of, including seals and so on, thousands of them. Others? Okay, so I think next week I'm going to try and cram 2 chapters in one so that we have time to get to the epilogue, because I don't think we should leave without Job's response and the last word. Okay. So I'm going to try and cram 2 chapters. Yeah. I think so. Yeah, I think so. Yes. Yeah. Also, if anyone's interested, much of this is written already, full of typos, but written. So if anyone's interested, I'm happy to share them. If you don't publish before I do. Okay, so yeah, if anyone wants more detail of it, I can give you the relevant parts of it or the whole thing if you like. Okay.